once again. So this morning, obviously, we are moving into a new season in the life of the church, and we are going to begin celebrating or begin our Advent journey, if you will, for the next 4 weeks. But this year, rather than doing many of the traditional themes that we have done in previous years, I wanted us to just take a step in a different direction and explore a little bit different theme. And so throughout the course of Advent this year, I wanted us to consider the meaning of light, both in our lives and within the Scriptures. Okay, and so as we can already see evident from our community and perhaps even in our homes, people are putting lights up all over, right? And some people have just a few lights on a tree or a couple of ornaments outside, and then you've got some people that go all out, right? And it kind of reminds me of the National Lampoon's Christmas thing where the guy's thing just spins and spins and spins as soon as he plugs it in, right? But they're absolutely beautiful. And one of the things that our family likes to do is to spend time around our Christmas tree. Okay, and I said up in New Auburn that my mom was really a Christmas fanatic, right? Her tree goes up well before Thanksgiving. It doesn't really come down until after March, and it just... There's Christmas songs being played year-round. I'm not quite that extreme in my Christmas giddiness, but the Christmas tree in our house really serves sort of this focal point. And so one of the traditions we have is almost always the first one out of bed races down the stairs and plugs in the tree. And it's not long then before most of us begin to congregate there together, and we just sometimes sit there almost like when you're staring at a fire. We just sit there and look at the tree, and we drink our coffee, and we talk. And it got me thinking as I was considering that ritual in our own family and thinking, what would happen if there were no lights throughout this season? How different would our experience be if there was absolutely nothing? Right? And maybe you don't decorate a lot yourself, but think about what it would be like to just drive through town and there's no decorations, there's no lights. It'd be kind of boring, right? Now, think about light in a more general nature. What would it be like if even the light we had in our world was diminished to some capacity? Right, think of people in Fairbanks, Alaska, right? On their shortest day of the year, the sun doesn't rise until after 10:30 in the morning, and it sets by like 3. Okay, they get 3.5 hours of sunlight that day. The northernmost town in Alaska experiences a sort of darkness for 67 days out of the year. It starts in mid-November and it ends near the end of January, because the sun never makes it up over the horizon because they're so far north and the earth is tilted in such a dramatic fashion. And what would be like if just all of a sudden there was no light, period? What would happen if our sun just decided to go out in this moment? Right? Now, scientists believe that for at least 8 minutes, if the sun disappeared, we'd still have light for at least 8 minutes, right? Because that's how long it takes the light rays to travel to the earth. But after that, it would be completely dark. And it wouldn't be long before the temperature dropped to such a degree that it would become inhabitable for us to even live. And that's not to mention, of course, the fact that the sun is sort of the center of our galaxy, and it holds all of the planets in alignment. So if the sun was gone, we would just simply start drifting. And within a couple of months, our oceans would freeze solid. Now, scientists believe that the core of the earth could maybe, keep some level of heat because of the core pressure and temperature of that. But life would really cease to exist. So friends, we're going to go back today and we're going to look at this concept of light because it's important not just from the physical aspects of it, but it's important also for us to look at it from a spiritual side as well, okay? And so I'm going to begin with a story that should be pretty familiar to almost all of you, and that comes from the very first chapter of our Bible. It's Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to read the first 5 verses. So if you have your Pew Bible or you have your device, I invite you to just follow along with me as we read this. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. While a wind from God swept over the face of the waters, then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." Now, one of the main concepts I want us to consider as we go through this series over the next 4 or 5 weeks is to think about this phrase, the light is life, right? Because as I've just portrayed to you, if we don't have light, the physical light and heat from the sun, we cease to exist. But friends, can't the same thing be said if we let the light, our spiritual light, go out, or if we lose focus of the source of our light? Now, the scriptures are full of the use of light, right? From this physical, literal creation that God has, to, again, this idea that God himself represents light. It's part of God's essence, part of his characteristic, right? And so we read in the Psalms that God is radiant with light. Later on in this series, we'll look at how Jesus, when he comes on the scene, says, "I am the light of the world." In 1 John, the author of the letter says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him while we walk in the dark, then we lie, and we do not know what is true. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, and we have fellowship with one another, then the blood of Jesus cleanses our sins. All right? And so, friends, there's this theme throughout of God not only creating light, but also being the very source of light. And so as we go back to our scriptures this morning and we look at these first couple of verses, it says that God created the heavens and the earth, or as God was creating the heaven and the earth, there was this formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, right? There's this imagery of this chaos, this primordial water, if you will, and it's dark and it's just sort of swirling. We might say that this is representative of chaos, right? And many of the ancient peoples in their own creation stories had multiple gods who would deal with this. For some, it was Marduk and Tiamat. For the Greeks, it would be Gaia and Uranus, right? These deities that create and fight over the order. Now, again, friends, one of the things that I will say is that as we read creation, oftentimes we move into considering this as a very literal and sort of scientific explanation for how things come to be. And yet, as we read the scriptures today, I want us to consider that the author of this chapter is, yes, considering the creation of the earth, but there's something else. His focus isn't primarily on the creation. His or her focus is on who God is and what God does. And so for the author that's writing this chapter, there's a focus on how God orders this chaos, how God removes the darkness of this creation. Okay? And so we again have this God, this God that is beyond space and time and who exists and is sort of looking at this chaos, right? And there's this powerful representation of God sort of breathing over the waters, and in a moment he just proclaims, "Let there be light." Now, I don't know about you, but I envision it just sort of like this huge flash, just boom. How many of you have ever been in a dark room, right? Just a completely dark room, and you flip on the light, right? It's almost agonizing for your eyes. It takes your eyes, your pupils a while to just adjust so that you can take it all in. That's how I envision this, right? That God reveals all that was there. God is in control of this creation. He's more powerful than the chaos that resides in the deep places. And friends, again, let me say that when we think about that from a spiritual context, that again, chaos and darkness are not of God. But God is the source of our light, and God shines into the dark places in our lives. God shines into the dark places of our world, and He reveals what's hidden there. And it's not a surprise to Him because He already knows. Now, friends, one of the things that I want us to consider again is, what does it mean for us? Because as we go through this chapter, after God creates and fills His creation with things, He comes to one of the pinnacle creations, and that is humanity, right? And what do the Scriptures tell us about us as creations? That we're made in God's image, right? Each and every one of us made in God's image. Now, friends, I want to go a little bit further, and I want to say that in some ways, God has given us the same power, right? The same creative power that exists within God exists within us because we are image bearers. Now, we can't just necessarily walk around and say something and it manifests on the spot, right? That's not the level of creative power that we have. But even by the time we get to Jesus, we see that we're invited to cooperate in the building of His kingdom, right? We're given a level of authority and dominion within that kingdom to go out and to do the things that He calls us to do, to go make disciples and tell everyone about His love for us. Now, one of the themes that I want to draw our attention to here, and I am going to kind of just stretch the text a little bit from this idea of us just looking at God as light, but looking at, again, this idea of an ordering of the universe, right? Because that's very prominent here in what the writer is telling us. Because again, even if you look at the titles that we have for this, 6 days of creation and a Sabbath, right? There's an ordering that takes place in God's realm, in God's dominion. And so just as God creates in 6 days and then orders a rest, the climactic rest of Sabbath, what does it look like when we order our lives? Or what happens to our lives when we get out of order, right? We find that when we're not in order, right, when we don't have orderliness in our life, all of a sudden that chaos starts to come back in and it starts to swirl around in there. And our life tends to get a little hectic and a little crazy. So I have to admit, as I'm preparing this sermon, I really thought, gosh, I'm going to be preaching to myself more than you guys, because I'm sitting here trying to prepare my sermon and my office is a disaster. Okay, I had cleaned my office on Monday, and yet by the time I got back this week to work on stuff, it was so cluttered, I couldn't find anything. And now again, many of you know that I'm not the most orderly person, right? I don't have to have everything in just an exact spot and everything has to be clean all the time. But it was such a mess that I started to just cringe. I started to go crazy because I had all this stuff around me and I could not figure out how to be productive. I'm looking through papers, I'm looking for notes that I had that I can't find, I'm looking for booklets that I thought were there and they're not there anymore. And I've got stuff all over the place. And it got me thinking, how important is it that we find order in our own life? That again, God calls us to order the events, to prioritize things in our life a certain way. And as we do that, that ordering creates a freedom and gives us a fuller sense of life. Right? So think about, again, when my office is clean, how much more productive and free am I to go out and to prepare in a productive way, right? When your house is clean, how much freer and excited do you feel to be in that place, right? Now, friends, what about when deeper areas, more personal inner areas get out of whack, when they begin to lose that ordering, right? What happens when our priorities get out of alignment? When the source of our light ceases to be number one, and pretty soon, maybe it's fifth or sixth, right? And I told you this summer that really happened to me, right? As I was going through trying to do all of the things, my priorities just got completely out of whack. I didn't create enough margin in my schedule to do something, and then rather than rearranging it on the spot, I just tried to plow through it. I was just being hard-headed, and I said, to heck with this. I'm just going to keep going. But by the time I got done, I was able to do it, fortunately, but by the time I got done, I was exhausted. Right? And so, friends, what does it look like for you in your life to create an order? And maybe there's something this morning that if you'll just listen to that still small voice of God, you'll hear that call on that place in your life, and God says, look, we need to look at this area because it's not helping you. I want you to have more because I can see what's going on inside of you, and I know that you feel it inside of you. So let's begin to order that. Let's begin to kind of clean that area up. Now, again, friends, as we move from this ordering, I also want us to take a moment and focus back in on the command, on this idea of God speaking, and as God speaks, creation happens, right? There's a creative potency in that. Now, friends, one of the things that as we get especially into the New Testament, there's this image of not only God being light, but also there's this idea that the light of God lives inside of us, right? And that we are to shine that light from the inside out to the world. And we're to push back against the darkness and the chaos that exists within our world. All right, so as we go through this Advent season, one of the things I deeply want you to consider is the power of your words, right? We've talked a lot about the power of words through our time together here. And we've often said, or you've heard me say that, life and death is in the tongue, right? That we have the ability to speak life, to lift people out, to pull them up and pull them out, or we have the power to bury them and push them down with the words that we speak. And so in that sense, we too have this creative voice, this creative potency. Now I'm going to pick on my boys here for a little bit because they deserve it. But sometimes, I don't know why, but sometimes they fight and they argue. And sometimes they use their words in ways that are just really not nice. Right? And it's interesting because you watch them, it starts off as something goofy, and then pretty soon, all of a sudden, those sharp words come in just like a knife, and you just watch the other one's spirit just deflate. Right? In our family, we say, look, you're speaking words of death. You're killing the person in a metaphorical sense because of the power of your words. You're killing the spirit of that person when you talk to them like that. For those of you that have been married, think about that same thing, or if you're in a relationship, or even your friendships, right? Think of how easy it can sometimes be to speak those harsh, negative words to the people we care about. And what never ceases to amaze me in my own life is that we often speak those harsh, negative words more rampantly and abundantly to the people we love the most. And maybe that's because we trust and hope that they're strong enough to take it. But friends, it kills our relationship. And so, friends, as we go through our Advent journey and we look forward to the coming of the light of Christ, I want us to consider how we can honor Christ even now in this Advent season, and how we can radiate that life, that love and that grace that Jesus has given to us freely, and we can give that to the people that we interact with on a daily basis. And so, friends, when you're walking down the street, you might just be surprised what a smile and a friendly hello might mean to somebody. right? The fact that somebody's day might just be radically changed because someone actually took time out of their day to look at them and to notice them and to speak a word of encouragement. So friends, that is my prayer for you through this Advent season. Stay focused on the source of light, because that light is our life. And then let that light that resides in us be a life-giving force to other people. I've got a couple of action steps for you this morning. And the first one, again, is to do some sort of self-reflection and assessment. Let God speak to you and be willing to do some discernment and see if you have areas that maybe you need to clean up and you need to reorder. All right? Because again, chaos and confusion and darkness are not of God, or they're not from God. Right? God desires to shine the light in on those things, to bring forth truth. And then finally, friends, spend time reordering areas in a way that are in alignment with God's kingdom for you. So friends, God bless you.